Greetings. I'm Dr. Frank Beaty, and I am delighted to be your professor for the coming 8 weeks. It's a joy to welcome back about 18 of you who have previously had me as an instructor in some class sometime, and I look forward to reconnecting with you as well as with the other 32 students that I have. We have uh, one section of cultural dynamics and two sections of the church and the community. So it's a great time. 7 of you are taking both classes, so you'll get a double dose. From my information in the upper left-hand corner of Blackboard, you will see a lot of background about my educational training, and I put that also in my introduction in the discussion board. But let me tell you a little bit about myself. My wife and I have been married for over 50 years. We have 3 children, 26 grandchildren, and 8 great-grandchildren, plus 2 more are on the way. My parents were farmers in western Illinois. They purchased a farm in 1939, shortly after the Depression. And as they moved to the farm, they tried for the first year to go back to the church they had attended for about 5 years, which was 15 miles away. Now remember, travel in 1939 is hardly comparable to what we have today. So 15 miles, especially in the spring, winter, and fall, were quite a complication. So they had an increasing passion to get a church started in their own community where their kids could grow up with church friends and go to school with them and be connected in many ways. And then one day, 2 unsaved guys came to my dad and said, "Would you help get a church started in our community?" They were farmers in the same neighborhood. My wife and my sister and I have discussed this a number of times. Neither one of us can ever remember either of these men attending church, but they had a passion for a church to start in their community. And so my parents, as committed Christian farmers, were the driving force to get that church started. They were lay leaders in many different aspects. They helped finance it and invested hours and hours of work in getting that church planted, along with a young pastor who had just graduated from Moody. Anyway, the church is still thriving today. What an exciting story. Church planting, before it was even discussed, they were visionaries for their community and neighborhood. We had a typical family farm of the 1950s. We raised hogs, we raised beef cattle, we had a small dairy herd, we raised chickens for meat and eggs. So we were a self-sustaining farm. Somehow, when I was about 12 years old, I persuaded my dad on a Sunday afternoon to let me bring home a little weakling lamb. She was the youngest of triplets, and my uncle was going to kill her unless one of us cousins took her home. Now, I didn't know at that point in time, my dad had previously said, "There will never be a sheep on my farm again. I've had enough of them." And when he said something like that, you knew that's the way it was. But anyway, he let me bring this little lamb home, not knowing that God was going to use that little 4-legged animal to teach me so much about being a shepherd of God's people. It was an education I deeply appreciated. I was the youngest of 3 children, and when I was about 7 or 8 years old, my church decided to do a missions project. That's kind of visionary, wasn't it? To hold a Bible school in a little community about 25 miles from the farm. My sister drove each day and took some workers with her, and I rode along, probably for the ride. But God was there. And as I was in my class, I learned two verses from Isaiah 57, 20 and 21. But the wicked are like the troubled sea, whose waters cannot rest. They cast up mire and dirt. There is no peace, saith my God, to the wicked. Now that's King James Version, of course. That was what was available at that point in time. But a number of months later, a river that was about 3 miles from the farm flooded, and the teacher at our one-room school decided we kids needed to go see this flood. So as we came down, headed down into the valley, we could see on both sides of the highway, the dike that was the roadbed for the highway was nearly having water on the road. And as I looked to the left, there was swirling, muddy waters. I looked to the right, as far as I could see, there was ugly, dirty water filled with floating logs and everything else. And the still small voice said, but the wicked are like the troubled sea whose waters cannot rest. They cast up mire and dirt. There is no peace, saith my God, to the wicked. A few days later, after Sunday evening church, I came home and directly went to my bedroom, an unusual habit, and knelt down there at that chair beside my bed and prayed to receive Christ as my Savior. As I grew, I was very active in 4-H and Future Farmers of America, and intended to return to the farm and farm with my dad after I had gone to University of Illinois School of Agriculture on scholarship. But one Sunday morning, as I was preparing my Sunday school lesson, it was as if a sentence or two jumped out on my page and said, Frank, pay attention. The statement was, be sure that what you say is God's will for your life is not your own selfish will. Now my brother, who was 4 years older than I, had already sensed the call of God to be a pilot mechanic with Wycliffe when he was in junior high, so it was inevitable that I would be the person who would take over the farm. But I finally decided that I would apply to Moody, and if accepted, I would take at least 1 year there before going on to university. My brother and my sister had both graduated from there, and so I did. Great year. The summer that I got home from college, a man who was a pastor in a nearby town and had influenced my life as a teenager said to me, when you get your chores done one of these nights, why don't you come over for a visit? I'd love to talk to you. Well, he had been my camp counselor, and I had instigated a few tricks on him, and I wondered if he had finally discovered that I was the instigator or what. I had no idea what he wanted to talk to me about, but he seemed to be very interested in talking to me. So I went over one evening, and as we chatted, we covered a number of different things, and then he got the conversation to his focus. I was stunned. He said, a small village has voted their mainline denomination out because of liberalism, and they need a pastor. Would you consider becoming their pastor? You'd ride the train from Chicago down to Galesburg, get your car, and then you do pastoral ministry on the weekend, and late Sunday night, early Monday morning, you'd catch the train and go back to Chicago. I was stunned. Out of respect for him, I agreed that I would preach for them one Sunday in August, but that was the extent of my commitment. Then in September, I received a letter from them. Would you consider being our pastor? I knew I needed to pray about that, but I also sensed that God's working in all of this was indeed calling me to be their pastor. I was 19 years old, but I had strong biblical foundation. And so I said yes, and I began that trek every weekend. Interestingly, that church was located in the town where my home church had conducted Bible school, and I had memorized Isaiah 57:20 and 21. God does some marvelous works, doesn't he? And so I continued at that church 4 years before I resigned and went to Dallas Seminary and furthered my education to you. I want to say to you, welcome, and pray for this class. And I will pray for you that we will each enhance our understanding of our ministry setting, our own, our churches, our communities. And that as we grow together, we will learn both how, in cultural dynamics, to understand culture, but in the church and the community, to understand how we can bring the gospel to the community where God has planted us. We're in for an exciting time. God bless you.